I want to be clear in how I characterize this. This is mostly a protest.
Go Biden!
It is not, generally speaking, unruly.
This is, again, an attempt by Donald Trump to distract from the real issues of this campaign.
I'm going to punch him out, and I'm going to go to jail, and I'm going to be happy.
It comes from China. That's why. It comes from China.
You're not going to get COVID if you have these vaccinations.
As always, a heartfelt thank you goes out to those of you who've taken time out of your schedule to check out this week's episode of Divided We Fall, the podcast that will not be woke, will not be politically correct, and where no one is safe from being called out for hypocrisy. Divided We Fall will always be brought to you by AR Tactical LLC, Houston's finest concierge firearms company. They bring FFL transfers, LTC classes, and firearms proficiency training to you at your home, office, church, or wherever you're most comfortable. So go find them on Facebook and give them a like at AR Tactical LLC or call 346-465-5994 to discover how they can cater a class to your needs today. This is Episode 7, Gun Control. As normal, before I get into the meat of today's episode, I want to address a few of the goings-on in our world. First and foremost, I want to congratulate my Houston Astros on an, interesting season. They kept us on our toes throughout this year for sure, but unfortunately, it came to an end too soon. Hesitantly, I'd also like to issue a congratulations to our fellow Texas team, the Rangers, for their first appearance in World Series since 2011. Full disclosure, I can't stand losing to any Dallas team. It irks me to no end that there are native Houstonians, some even still living here, who root for the Rangers over their hometown team. Personally, I think they could all use a swift kick in the britches, but nevertheless, the Rangers beat my Astros and advanced to the World Series, and I wish them the best of luck. Well, all except Adolis Garcia. That absolutely classless, bat-flipping, trash-talking, smug, sawed-off little shit. He can pucker up and kiss every inch of my pasty ass. Seager, Carter, Altuve, Bregman, they all showed how to hit a home run and run the bases with class. Take a lesson, punk. As has become the standard over the last few weeks, the situation in Israel deserves some attention as well. Since we last talked, there have been some disturbing developments both in the region and here at home. In the Middle East, tensions are getting stretched to the breaking point as more and more groups are starting to rattle their swords, itching to get in on the fight. As the second American carrier group has entered the Mediterranean, our efforts to bolster American influence in the region to avert crisis has begun to backfire, as Americans are now coming under fire. The USS Carney, a naval destroyer escorting the Gerald R. Ford carrier strike group, shot down 3 missiles that were fired from Yemen by Houthi rebels destined for Israel. The Houthis have never shown support for Hamas or Hezbollah in the past. This new development is disturbing. Is it a new trend? Are once divided and separate Muslim terror organizations uniting against U.S. and our allies? Even still, as Israel is announcing the time for a ground invasion of Gaza and the West Bank is imminent, Iran has said once again they will retaliate for any loss of life of what they call innocent Palestinians in the ground attack. Never mind the fact that while Israel has been encouraging any non-combatants to leave the area in an attempt to keep civilian casualties to a minimum, Hamas has been closing the very evacuation routes that they need. They want to keep them there. They want to use them as human shields. Possibly even more nefarious, they may be hoping for Palestinian casualties. This could solidify support from their handlers in Iran and Iran's new allies, Russia, China, and North Korea. Meanwhile, in one of the 2 breaking developments that occurred after I had already mostly finished the script for this week's show, the United States has entered the conflict. I spoke a little earlier about the missiles that were intercepted by a U.S. Navy destroyer. What I haven't yet talked about, mainly because it was difficult to get details on, is the now confirmed fact that American installations in the region have been the victim of multiple drone and rocket attacks in the last week. It's sad that it's been so difficult to find any information about these attacks, but the mainstream media is giving them exceedingly little coverage. As of the time of this episode, 21 American service members have been injured in the attacks, and one American contractor has died. Of course, when you do find information about the American casualties on a major news source, they always downplay it. They say the American injuries were minor. They say they were slight. They say the contractor who died because of health conditions that were aggravated by the attack. Mind you, these are the same news sources who still to this day say that Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick was killed by January 6th protesters, even though it's been proven he died as the result of multiple strokes the following day on January the 7th. Now, was the January 6th riot a contributing factor? We have to be able to admit that, yeah, it probably was. But then you have to address this contractor's death in the same manner. Regardless, any attack on an American military position should be taken seriously and should be dealt with swiftly, strongly, and we've finally done just that. Yesterday, October 26th locally, United States Air Force F-16 Fighting Falcons launched precision airstrikes against 2 Iranian National Guard locations in eastern Syria. Defense officials call these self-defense retaliatory strikes, both against an ammunition storage facility and a separate weapons storage facility. The Pentagon claims that these sites are linked not only to the IRG, but to the militias that they back who've been launching the attacks that have injured our military members. Now, given the saber-rattling that Iran has been doing, threatening their involvement if Israel harms any Palestinians during its ground incursions, this latest strike is surely to have gotten their attention, and probably has them ready to jump into the conflict with both feet. So the world teeters on the brink of world war, because of the brutal Hamas attack on innocent Israeli civilians, because of the Israeli incursion into Hamas, and now because of the American bombings on Iranian-controlled facilities. We stare into the abyss of world war because Hezbollah encourages the use of human shields, both innocent Palestinian citizens and the Israeli and American hostages they took in their October 7th terror attack. And me, well, I have to laugh. I laugh because of this week's Hypocrite of the Week. That's right, folks. This week's Hypocrite of the Week is none other than the Hamas shit-stains themselves. It turns out that after they took it upon themselves to cross the Israeli border, murder innocents, rape women, children, elderly, burn babies in their cribs, behead families and leave them on display in the streets, then crawl back into their holes of shit and goat hookers they emerged from. Once Israel announced the ground attack was imminent, these same worthless wastes of space announced to the world that they want a ceasefire. That's right, they threw the initial right hook, catching the world unaware. And once we regained our feet and prepared to counter, now they want a ceasefire? Bullshit! Think of it like this. In the middle of the night, somebody breaks into your home. They murder your dog, impregnate your cat, and mutilate your favorite fish. You hear the noise. You go to check it out with your trusty shotgun, just like Uncle Biden recommends. And when you come face to the face with the scumbag who did all this, suddenly they want peace? I don't think so, Scooter. You light that son of a bitch up with every round of double-aught buck you got loaded. You reload, you finish him off at close range until his mama won't even recognize his remains as human. Only a coward asks to get out of the fight after they've started it. And that's why the Hamas terrorist turds are this week's Hypocrite of the Week. Seriously, though, friends, the tinderbox is full. The sparks are flying. And eventually, one of them is going to end up setting the world ablaze in war. Have some extra food and water on hand. Have the ability to protect yourself and the things you've put away to be prepared. And mostly, have a plan and know what you'll do should the worst happen to protect you and your family. Think of it as insurance. You've got medical insurance, right? Car insurance. It's not because you hope you get sick or you hope you get into a wreck, but to take care of yourself if either of those things happen. Look at being a little extra prepared in the same way. It's just insurance that you can eat or drink later if you ever have to use it in a disaster type scenario. And, well, that's all I got to say about that. Now, I mentioned earlier the American retaliations were one of two major developments. The other began when Richard Card, an evil, mentally unstable U.S. Army Reserve member who heard voices, stole an AR-15 from the Guard Armory and went on a shooting rampage in two separate locations in Lewiston, Maine. When the carnage was done, the smoke had cleared. 18 people were dead. Our hearts, our thoughts, and our prayers go out to all of those affected. They go out to the loved ones of those who are lost, to the injured who will forever carry the physical and emotional scars of this cowardly act, and to the first responders still on the hunt almost 48 hours later. At the time I'm writing this, at 10:30 a.m. Friday the 27th of October, Card is still at large, and one of the largest manhunts in the Northeast's history is underway. Predictably, almost immediately, politicians on both sides of the aisle began to use the incident for political gain. Republicans, in an effort to cut off the soon-to-come Democratic arguments, point out that once again the shooter has a history of mental illness and blame it on the mental health crisis in our country. Democrats, of course, went right to gun control. Always right to gun control. The plan with Divided We Fall has always been to eventually go to a video blog format, the very first episode of which was always going to be an in-depth explanation of the major flaws in gun control arguments we always hear from the left. But I think, given that it's so fresh in everyone's minds, I think we can go ahead and make a go of it, audio only, and as Jen Psaki would say, we can circle back to the video version when the time comes. So let's dive right in and address the most obvious first. When the left talks about gun control, it's always about new laws to restrict gun ownership, be it the types of guns that can be sold, the magazine capacity of those guns, universal background checks, whatever the new law it is that they're pushing. The incontrovertible fact that they miss every time is that criminals do not, by definition, adhere to the rule of law. If you break this entire argument down to its fundamental facts, this one always seems to fly right over their heads. Take this latest instance. Card, because of Maine's yellow flag laws, should not have been able to legally purchase a firearm. And while in this case the yellow flag laws failed because Card's mental status was never properly relayed to the officials, it doesn't matter because he didn't purchase the weapon. He stole the weapon from the Army Reserve Armory where he was stationed. Theft. Illegal. Yet he did it anyway. He then proceeded to a bowling alley and entered the premises with the illegally stolen firearm, walking right past the legally posted "No Firearms Allowed" sign. Possession of a firearm in a restricted area. Illegal, yet he did it anyway. He then indiscriminately opened fire into the crowd. Murder. Illegal, yet he did it anyway. The second location, a bar approximately 4 miles away, also a gun-free zone, went basically the same way. All of these laws he broke without even a glimpse of remorse. What could possibly make you think that more laws would have prevented this senseless tragedy? Well, he performed it with an assault rifle, so we needed an assault weapons ban. Okay. First off, can you define assault rifle for me?
I've held an AR-15 in my hand. I wish I had it. It is as heavy as 10 boxes that you might be moving. And the bullet that is utilized, a 50 caliber, these kinds of bullets, need to be licensed and do not need to be on the streets.
There's so much wrong there. It's really hard to even unpack. How is it possible that my hometown of Houston is about to elect this brain-dead shitshow mayor? Please, folks, don't vote She-Jack for Houston mayor. Most people claim that the AR in AR-15 stands for assault rifle. False. The company responsible for the original design is Armalite Rifles, AR. Lest we forget our 4th grade English class that taught us that assault is a verb, not an adjective. Well, that means it's an action word. While the AR is definitely capable of being used in the commission of an assault, it isn't capable of performing the assault on its own. I should know, being the owner of, well, let's just say a few of these rifles. They're lazy. They just lay in the safe all day. They don't do anything. Even if someone were to break into my house in the middle of the night, they wouldn't suddenly unlock themselves out of my safe and come to my defense. They're simply a tool. The actions of a tool are the result of the hands that you put them in. Put in the hands of the wrong person, it can be used for evil. Put it in the hands of the right person, and they can be used to protect. Like Stephen Wilford, who in 2017, during the Sutherland Spring, Texas mass shooting, grabbed his AR-15, ran towards danger, and shot and killed the suspect, ending the threat. While yes, it is true, the original design Armalite released after the AR-10 was for the M16, the standard battle rifle for the USGIs starting after its adoption in 1964. Well, here we go. Cue the screams of, "See, it's a weapon of war!"
They are weapons of war and weapons of death and weapons of destruction that we should not permit out here.
Strike two. False again. While the platform of the AR-15 and the M16 is almost identical, they have one very, very major difference. The M16, used by the U.S. military, has the ability to select fire. This means that with the flip of a switch, the weapon can go from single fire semi-automatic, meaning one pull of the trigger equals one round discharged from the firearm, to burst fire. This means one pull of the trigger discharges a 3-round burst from the rifle. Then flipping the switch again, you can put the rifle in fully automatic mode, which means a depression of the trigger unleashes a constant stream of rounds to be discharged from the firearm until the trigger is released. This function makes the M16 a machine gun and therefore illegal for citizens to own. In the United States, since its inception, the M16 has been illegal. Machine guns, you see, were outlawed for civilian ownership in 1934, when the 73rd Congress passed the National Firearms Act. They passed this act in response to gangland warfare attached to Prohibition. The AR-15, the most popular sporting rifle sold in the United States that, yes, does look like an M16, is semi-automatic only. That means one pull of the trigger, one round. That's it, period. Despite what some freaking idiotic politicians would have you believe.
Full semi-automatic to disperse with 30 bullets within half a second.
No. Just no, you moronic oxygen wasters, no. One pull, one round. Just like any other pistol, rifle, or shotgun on the market. Let me say that again for the cheap seats. The AR-15 fires one round per one trigger pull, just like every other pistol, rifle, or shotgun on the market. Hardly sounds like a weapon of war, right? But how about She-Jack and Tennessee turd burglar Congressman Cohen's other claims?
And the bullet that is utilized, a 50 caliber, these kinds of bullets, need to be licensed and do not need to be on the streets.
Because when they're hit with an assault weapon, they cannot be identified. They are obliterated. And they need DNA to identify them. They put holes in their bodies so large that there's no way they could survive.
So much stupidity, it hurts. This is where the video I was discussing earlier would really be helpful. Both the military M16 and the civilian AR-15 were originally designed to fire the Remington-designed .223 round, and later adapted to accept the 5.56x45 NATO round. This latter cartridge was derived from and is almost identical to the .223 caliber round. In fact, for the most part, the rounds are interchangeable, and any 5.56 chambered rifle can fire the .223 cartridge. Now, why is this important? As both the previous dipshits tried to falsely claim in the clips I just played, the 5.56 round does not obliterate anything. It's a very small, fast round, actually only microscopically bigger in diameter than the .22 caliber bullet that so many 10-year-old boys have been turned loose into the woods with in the American South for generations. Now, the most popular two hunting rounds in the United States, the .308 and the .270, absolutely dwarf the .223 round. Speaking only of the projectiles, the .308 round measures approximately 3/4 of an inch in length and comes in bullet weights measuring from 150 grains to over 200 grains. The .270, while slightly narrow in diameter than .308, measures almost an identical length and comes in weights from 90 to 170 grain. A grain is a unit of measurement for the weight of a firearm projectile, an individual grain being the equivalent of 1/7,000th of a pound. When I say dwarfed compared to the .308 and .270, the .223 5.56 round in the AR-15 has a projectile that is less than half an inch in length, and although it is available in grain weights up to 75, the most popular by a long shot is the 55 grain round. Picture that in your mind, if you will. 3/4 of an inch, less than half an inch, 90 to 227 thousandths of a pound versus 55. When you boil it down to it, the .223 looks like a toy next to these two others. Both Jackson Lee and Cohen are just plain wrong. What's worse is they know it, and they're intentionally trying to mislead the American people to further their gun control agenda. So, I believe I've properly debunked the assault weapons myth. Let's move on, shall we? The next big debate we always seem to have in the aftermath of these shootings is the true intention of the Second Amendment, how it exists in our Bill of Rights. Now, first, as I've said before, and has been reiterated both in the preamble of our Constitution and again in the Federalist Papers. The purpose of the Bill of Rights is to limit government from infringing on what the Founding Fathers labeled as our inalienable rights. The second of these amendments, being the subject of debate for years now, reads as follows. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Let's break down the arguments individually. First, the left likes to claim that the Second Amendment only applies to the keeping of arms by those who are in a formal militia. The major issue with this, as interpreted not only by the Supreme Court in multiple cases, but by legal scholars, is grammar. Read as written, the amendment reads, a well-regulated militia, comma, being necessary to the security of a free state, comma, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, comma, shall not be infringed. You see, it's the comma that's so important. It separates the militia requirement from the rights of the people. You got to remember that our framers wrote the Bill of Rights almost 20 years after they wrote our Constitution. They wrote it after they had declared independence from British monarchy rule and then had to defend that split with their very lives for almost 10 years during our Revolutionary War. They had a new outlook. They had learned from the lessons they were just given by the British. They knew that the people of the nation had to be able to defend themselves from tyranny should it ever rear its head here again. They encouraged local militias. They understood that they were necessary to keeping a free state, and militias at the time were not made up of professional soldiers. They weren't highly trained armies. They were normal, everyday people, people like you and me. But they were people who had arms and armaments that could come to the aid of their nation if necessary. That's the militia argument. The second argument the left loves to make against the Second Amendment are the words well-regulated. They like to say that the word regulated refers to regulating the types of firearms we as Americans can own. The issue with that is that historians point out that well-regulated, during the time the amendment was written, didn't refer to legal regulations. Instead, well-regulated at that time meant both well-stocked and well-practiced. So the very wording of the amendment encourages Americans not only to own weapons, but it demands that they be allowed to be well-stocked and well-practiced. How about the other two arguments that often go hand in hand with this one? First, that the amendment was written during the time when the most advanced weaponry was the musket, and the framers couldn't have possibly predicted the future of weaponry, and therefore they wouldn't want the Second Amendment applied to today's much more powerful and accurate firearms. To this, I would simply say, get off your computer, your TV, your phone, go write a letter of complaint with quill and an inkwell by candlelight, and send it to me by Pony Express. Second, the argument that even old Uncle Joe likes to often make.
But from the very beginning, the Second Amendment didn't say you can own any gun you want, as big as you want. You couldn't buy a cannon.
Well, this is either a blatant lie, or perhaps more likely, Joe's handlers just forgot to feed him his meds that day, and he was confused as usual. Either way, I'm going to let someone far brighter than me rebut his statement.
Yes, you could own a cannon, and you still can now. I don't know why Joe Biden keeps repeating this stupid statement, especially considering how many times it has been fact-checked as false, and he still keeps saying it. When the Second Amendment was passed, there were no federal laws about the type of gun you could own, and no states limited the kind of gun you could own. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11 of our Constitution gives Congress the power to grant letters of marque and reprisal, which were special waivers that allowed private individuals to act as pirates on behalf of the U.S. against countries engaged in war with it. Individuals who were given these waivers and owned warships obviously also obtained cannons for use in battle. The Second Amendment wasn't written to tell us what we can and can't own. It was written to tell you, i.e. the government, what you can't infringe on, i.e. the right to keep and bear arms.
If you don't follow Colion Noir, trust me, you need to. He breaks down Second Amendment issues like nobody else. Love your channel, Colion. Keep up the good work. So now we've addressed the attacks directly on the Second Amendment and its interpretation. What are some of the other gun grabber talking points? One Twitter, or X, user I saw, responded to a conservative fact that vehicles kill more people than guns every year. He said drivers are required to carry insurance, subject to a test in which they must prove they're a safe driver, must renew their license every few years per state requirement, and vehicles are required to be registered. He says he would be happy to apply the same requirements to gun ownership. The problem with this argument goes back to the Constitution. Remember, I told you earlier, and Colion reminded you, the Second Amendment addresses, and the Supreme Court has further defended, the inalienable right to self-defense, and it places restrictions on the government from infringing on that right. Driving a vehicle is not a right. It's a privilege. The Constitution never mentions how you can travel from place to place. Article 4, Section 2, Clause 1 of the Constitution says states cannot limit the rights of citizens to freely travel from state to state. However, it doesn't cover the means of conveyance. Therefore, driving is a privilege, not a right, and not in the same realm nor subject to the same protections as the right to keep and bear arms. How about the gun show loophole they always talk about needing to close? The truth is there is no such loophole. 99% of firearms sales that occur at gun shows are done so by FFLs, or Federal Firearms Licensees. These FFLs have to fill out the same paperwork and submit the sale to the same FBI NICS background check as the buyer would be subject to if he purchased the firearm at a retail store. But they'll yell, well, what about the private sellers? Let me tell you something. I am an FFL. I've attended a multitude of gun shows here in Southeast Texas, from Navasota to Galveston, from Beaumont to Seguin. I can tell you, the private sale of firearms on the premises are prohibited in almost every single one that I've attended. One ex-user immediately threw back at me that gun shows provide a forum where private individuals can link up and then do their transaction in the parking lot to avoid scrutiny. That's easily debunked. I mean, how is that any different from the same two individuals doing their transaction in the parking lot of a McDonald's? How are you going to close the Mickey D's loophole? The fact is, while the private transfer and sale of firearms is in fact not subject to the same rules and checks as sales conducted by those of us with a license, their numbers are infinitesimal compared to the numbers of legal sales. Not to mention, even private transfers can still be facilitated by an FFL. Background checks can still be ran should the seller deem it necessary. What else does X have to say on the matter? Oh, God. Okay, I have to address this. Can we please all agree that dipshit extraordinaire David Hogg needs to have his mouth permanently sewed onto his own asshole? He took to X to blame white suburban women, saying that gun violence won't end until they, quote, stop voting for Republicans who are endangering our schools and communities by flooding them with guns.
A sphincter says what? What? A sphincter says what? What? Exactly.
Who in the hell thinks that anyone would want to arbitrarily flood our schools with guns without any sort of safety measure. I'm surrounded by Pro-2A advocates, and I know there's not one of us who feel that way. Now, that's not to say that any of us would mind at all if schools brought back outdoor education like they used to, teaching kids the proper handling and safety procedures regarding the use of firearms. That used to be taught in almost every school. Unfortunately, curriculums now center more around, well, third graders' sexual identity than it does about teaching them true life lessons. But again, that's for another episode. I can keep flipping through X, but honestly, at this point, the stupidity I'm reading is hurting my brain. So, regardless of what politicians say, look at their voting records. The left wants monopolized gun control across the board. They don't want an armed population. They've fallen so far from the ideals of our forefathers that they've become the tyrannical body that our forefathers wrote the Second Amendment to protect us from. Well, at least they wanted us to have the ability to protect ourselves. They haven't forgotten that it was a group of armed rabble-rousers just like you and me that used their weapons to stand up to tyranny 240 years ago. They began this experiment in self-governance. If they disarm us, they know we can do it again. If we can unite under the banner of freedom again and keep them from taking our God-given right to protect ourselves, then tyranny can never rule over this land again. If we can see past their lies and their misleadings, we can ensure that this experimental nation will not fail. But if we let them infect the truth with their lies, if we let them use senseless tragedy to both further erode our freedoms and to split us into pro-gun and anti-gun factions, well, then they've successfully divided us. And once again, my friends, as I say each week, and the title states, divided we fall. Thank you once again for listening to this episode of Divided We Fall. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share with all of your friends. But more than that this week, share your prayers. Share them with the people of Lewiston, Maine. Share them for the innocents lost and for the families. Share them for the first responders affected. And share your prayers for our nation. Pray that she may begin to heal this divide among us. See you next week.